Welcome to Farming for Health, where Farmer Lee Jones and I talk with leaders in food, farming, and health and wellness to spread knowledge and inspire a plant-forward future, starting now. Welcome to the Farming for Health podcast. I'm Dr. Amy Sapola, and I'm joined today by Kristin Donnelly, cookbook author and co-author of the Chef's Garden cookbook. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you.
Thank
Excited
you
to be here.
Thank you for being on. I'm so excited to talk with you. One of the first things I wanted to ask you about is you've had such an amazing career, and I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit about kind of your journey to where you are today and some of the projects you're working on. But really, as you went through all of these different roles, how did you get started? And what brought you to work in like the culinary world and with cookbooks?
I feel like it's a cliche, but it started in France, where I studied abroad as a junior in college. And, I was just amazed at how good the food tasted and how well I lived with the host family and how well they ate. And I did not go for anything food related, but that kind of sparked my interest. And I started taking some cooking classes when I returned to the States. And I worked in I just had jobs, after college. But a friend of mine was like, I don't think you're going to be happy until you switch over to doing something with food. And so I was living in Washington, D.C., and I applied for to go to culinary school, and I applied for some scholarships. And I was like, if I get a scholarship, I will go to culinary school. And I did. And I ended up moving to New York City, and I went to ICE, which is Institute of Culinary Education. And from there, I actually started an internship at Food and Wine magazine. And I thought it would be this 6-week amazing experience and then it would be done. And I actually thought I would return to France as a private chef or something like that. And I just kept getting hired for different projects. You want to stay and do this project. You want to stay and do this project. And then finally, a staff job opened up. And so I was there for 8 years. Very, very happy, dream job. And then I had a child. And it was still an amazing job, but it was just a hard transition. And I was like, I think I'm ready to do something more on my own and not be on staff somewhere. So I started freelancing and freelance writing, recipe development, recipe testing. And especially in the beginning, it was like anything that would come my way, I would say yes to. And over time, just, I guess, built a career working with people on their cookbooks. And that has happened in many different capacities, sometimes just behind the scenes, project managing, sometimes just testing recipes. I've helped people develop recipes. And then the Chef's Garden book was actually the first one where it was this full collaboration. And it's kind of cool because I feel like we could talk more about this, but I feel like it created this little niche for myself where I'm really interested in the kind of like the intersection of plants, food, and humans.
Mm-hmm.
And the working on this book sparked that. And I've had other projects since then in that realm.
Yeah, let's dive into that. That's, I think, something we're passionate about here too.
Yeah.
But what did that open up for you as you started to work in that realm?
Yeah, it's like as a cook, you get your vegetables and that's like there's your beet or there's your zucchini, and you never think, or I never did. I never thought that much about the plant that it came from. Even having done things like farm tours, it's like you go on a farm tour and you see the rows of plants and you're like, okay, good. There they are. But I hadn't thought much about the zucchini is this fruit and it has seeds inside and its whole goal is to reproduce. And we go so much more into in the book into this, but just looking at a plant with having needs and goals.
Right.
Yeah, it just opened up my eyes, and that came from conversations with farmer Lee Jones, as well as his father before he passed, and with Jamie Simpson, the chef, because Jamie also thinks very deeply about this and brings that onto his plate. So, um, yeah, it was, I guess that's how it started. It was like this, like,
Yeah.
them telling stories. And then I actually became so curious that I finally started gardening. I feel like it was something that I kept putting off. And then I was like, I have to garden if I'm going to do this, write this book. And then I ended up taking a class on herbalism and, just kind of going deep.
That's awesome. I love how it kind of inspired your own journey into like more of the plant world
Totally.
and going deeper with herbalism too. And that's I love herbalism, but I love like that connection with plants and being able to garden and have your hands in the soil or even just eat plants grown in really healthy soil. I think just gives you a greater appreciation for vegetables. And even since
Totally.
coming here, that's something you know, I already loved gardening and vegetables before I came, but it's something you're like, wow, I'm surrounded by other people like myself. And like to see people's passion around that, like everybody
Yeah,
on our team and, the people who enjoy our vegetables, it's really inspiring, I think. And it
totally.
just is like, it just drives you to like, oh man, I didn't even know that. I want to learn more. So, yeah.
Yeah. So many directions to go, so much to learn.
Yeah. What's one of the biggest lessons you've learned over the years working with cookbook authors in the development of their books?
So I have this podcast actually called Everything Cookbooks, and we talk a lot. It's with three other people, and we talk a lot about the book creation process. And our first episode is actually called like Should You Write a Cookbook? And that listen to the episode if you're interested in writing a cookbook, first of all, but I that episode has made me think a lot like when I'm talking to people who want to write a book. It's like, what do you want to say? What do you want to say? And why is the book the place to do this as opposed to, we have a zillion ways to communicate now. Instagram, TikTok, our own websites, email. So what can a book do that you can't do in that other media podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
another type of communication. So I think just trying to get that out, um, and, figure out what it is that will make a book unique as opposed to all these other ways of storytelling. That's like, I guess the biggest thing I've learned, and it's a constant learning process. And also I guess what I'm always after in every project.
Yeah. Is there like a clear, like, yes, you should write a book answer to that question? Like when you start reflecting on like what sort of content should be in a book, is there something that you're like, yes, this should always turn into a cookbook? Or is that really more like an individualized answer?
I mean, it's individualized. I think I love when there's a great story, and the
Mm-hmm.
farm has a great story and an ongoing story. So I do feel like when there is a great story, a lot of times that helps with the like, yes, you should absolutely should write a book. And I think when somebody has a perspective that's really strong or opinionated, or maybe even contrarian, a little bit contrarian, then that also might be like is an indicator that it's time to write a book,
Mm-hmm.
or a book is a great format for what you want
Yeah.
to say.
I think that's
So,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah,
When it comes to like co-authoring the book with Chef Jamie and with Farmer Lee and Bob Sr., can you talk a little bit more about that experience for you and kind of what it was like working together with everyone?
sure. So, for, well, let me start with what it was like in general, which was amazing because there's Farmer Lee, face of the farm, but there are also so many amazing people at this farm, who shared knowledge very generously. Um, and so once a week, I would talk with Chef Jamie, and once a week or so, I would talk with Farmer Lee. Then I'd also do a ton of my own research for writing up the vegetables so I could flesh out, so it was a mix of their stories from the farm, but also some history and maybe some health related information. But what was very funny was um, Farmer, especially, but everybody kept saying, like, or he kept saying, you really need to talk to dad. You really need to talk to dad. And the first time we finally had some time to talk, he did not want to talk to me.
Oh no. Oh
Um,
no. Do you know why?
he was very resistant. He felt like he kept saying, "I'm the past and they're the future, and I don't have anything to say." And um, and I think I just didn't know what to do, you know?
Right. That would be difficult.
But I will say, then we spent some time together months afterwards. I think it was a mix of me getting comfortable with trying to like finding ways to bring him out more,
Mm-hmm.
but he also got more comfortable with the idea of the book and his contribution and what he could say. And I'm sure everybody at the farm also probably talked him into it.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
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 That's so interesting. And I think it is really neat to have the multi-generation like perspective on where the farm has been and where it's at now and where it's going. And I think that's something really cool about being on like a family farm.
Yeah. And, Farmer Lee always talks so much about his dad's ideas. And, I realized, he is the genius behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just very funny, that first meeting.
Yeah, that's definitely memorable, I'm sure. Aw. A note from our sponsor. Farming for Health is brought to you by Farmer Jones Farm at the Chef's Garden. Farmer Jones Farm provides nutritious, regeneratively grown vegetables to home cooks nationwide. If you are searching for vegetables grown in a way that's healthy for you and good for the planet, try a curated box from Farmer Jones Farm. Get 15% off your order with the code FarmingForHealth15. So tell me a little bit more about your podcast. Like, what brought about coming together with other cookbook authors, and how did you decide like who you were going to host it with?
Sure. It was a very natural evolution of a group I got together with once a month anyway. So we were cookbook authoring can be kind of lonely, even when you work in a collaborative process. There's a lot of, you spend your time meeting with somebody, but then there's a lot of time solo figuring out how to write something, edit it, and then there's tricky things to navigate. Like, hey, this guy doesn't want to talk to me. What do I do? So just having, a group of colleagues or friends to commiserate with is awesome. And I did have that. So for about 5 years, I was meeting it was a group, usually 3 to 4 all women. And I don't know how it came about, but I was actually starting to get more interested in sharing behind the scenes and teaching people the process of cookbook authoring. And at some point we were like, we should make this into a podcast. And so we did. And I actually, right after the Chef's Garden book came out, I had a 12-episode podcast called Plant Out Loud. Total passion project. I mean, I did it myself. I edited everything myself. It's still up. People can find it. Farmer and Jamie are both on it, as well as many other guests. But I had learned how to produce a podcast, is my point. And so when they said, oh, we should do a podcast, and I was like, great. I've already made all the mistakes. And so the first thing we're going to do is hire an editor. So that's how it came about. It was like a natural evolution. So, and then we all have different perspectives in terms of like some people collaborate, some people write their own books. Yeah. So.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I'm excited to listen to it. That's great. So when it comes to your food philosophy, I really appreciate your philosophy, which is eat healthfully, indulge sometimes, and enjoy it always. Can you tell me how you came to adopt this food philosophy?
I think enjoyment of food is like probably more important than some people do. Mm-hmm. And I feel like enjoyment of food also helps me like slow down and savor food. And so that just as a behavior can be healthier. Um, and then when it comes to like eat healthfully, I know that's a little vague, but I guess what I mean there usually is, a lot of vegetables, whole foods in general, but indulge sometimes. Like I am not, thankfully, I don't have any food intolerances and or a dietary need to like cut a lot of things out. So for me, if I want some sweets every once in a while, or I want something made with heavy cream, or things that are seen as indulgent or not, maybe not healthy, I tend to eat them. But it's like that 80-20 rule. So it's like 80% of the time trying to stick to like a fairly like quote unquote healthy diet, 20% of the time probably what somebody would call not healthy. But again, enjoyment. I realize like there are a lot of people I know who maybe don't think about the enjoyment of food as much. It's very functional. Um, but for me, it's so important.
I think that is so important. And I'm super passionate about mindful eating. And I think that brings in that mindful aspect where you're using all of your senses and actually like you start digestion before the food even hits your mouth, right? And
Yeah.
so when you're actually like present and really enjoying it, if you're I always say if you're mad or you like feel really guilty about what you're eating, that digests in your body a whole lot different than something you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good," and like savoring every single bite.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's important sometimes to remove the stigma around like this is good and this is bad and I'm good if I eat this and I'm bad if I eat that. Like how do we just enjoy food, right? And like you
Yeah.
said, the majority of the time really healthy food. But if you indulge, like enjoy that indulgence.
Yeah, and I've also realized it's so I grew up in the low fat era as a
Me too.
child and teenager, and I have this very distinctive memory of my mom bringing home like Snackwell's cookies, which were like famously like no fat cookies, and I did eat an entire box. Um, and not because I was convincing myself necessarily that it was healthy, or maybe there was a little bit of that, but I almost feel like I couldn't get the satisfaction. And then I remember noticing eating like a real chocolate chip cookie, and I ate one, it might have been a larger one, but like I was like, wow, that's so good. I don't need anything else. I don't need
Mm-hmm.
any more because that was just like so it like hit the spot. Um, and I had that realization really early on, and I think that carried over into when I went to France. It's like the food just tastes so good. Like you don't need, yes, like I'm eating this super cheesy potato thing, but I can only eat like this much because it's so rich. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's so much to be said for that. And, falling back in love with the food and not thinking necessarily focusing so much on like the macros,
Right,
but
right.
more like the experience of the food and the taste and the flavor and what's gone into growing the food. There's so many other things beyond simply just like focusing on the minute details.
Yeah. The nutrition facts.
Yes, yeah. And so it sounds like being in France was such an inspirational experience for you. Is there anything you learned like that you have kept with you today as far as like cooking techniques or tips or like something you use really frequently?
I mean, I guess it's funny, like in France, not just it's not unique to France, but just other places, people are very good at shopping.
Mm,
And I feel like sometimes it starts there, the shopping or the sourcing.
yeah.
So it's like when you shop or, if it's in your garden, but basically like it starts there with the ingredients that taste really amazing. And then if you have that, then you kind of don't need um too many bells and whistles to make that food taste good. So I think that is something where like again, the family I lived with cooked almost every night, but it was always pretty simple stuff. Like sometimes people love in France love leeks, so it would be like braised leeks, pretty simple. Sometimes like pasta with smoke. I kind of remember they did this like pasta with smoked salmon pretty often. But it was just all so good. And every night they made a salad um, with like the delicate lettuces and this was 2000, so I feel like the quality of salad greens in the US wasn't nearly as good as it is today. And like the lettuces you can get from the farm, but also some of the farmers near me that are just amazing. So you don't need anything more than like a little vinegar and oil.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I guess I don't know if it's a philosophy, but it's definitely like something I learned there and that has carried through um until today.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's something I hear often, like the appreciation for shopping regularly and often, and the quality of food, and the freshness. I think that makes such a difference and can really inspire great recipes and, great simple meals at home. And I know you bring up simple preparation. Oftentimes I hear, like, especially from clients or patients, like, I don't have time to cook. I'm not interested in cooking, all of those things. What would be your answer to those sorts of things?
It's funny. I think interest is so hard because I have
Mm-hmm.
friends who are not interested in cooking and they're just not, and I get it. Um, and it's like finding that thing that might kick it off. Like, what is that? What do you really like to eat and trying to figure
Mm-hmm.
out that thing. Or I feel like some people might be motivated by finding a certain method where, for example, like when I first learned to cook risotto, it's like you realize, oh, once I know how to make one risotto, I can make any risotto I want. Or once I learn to make this kind of stew, I can make any version I want. So for me, that's I think what started to get me really interested was like, oh, learn this method, then make it my own. Um, this is just like the fastest. Like, this isn't really like this is a micro tip, but and not related to the amazing vegetables at the Chef's Garden, but I basically realized that you can buy frozen cauliflower rice recently, and I now keep a bag in my freezer all the time for when like there's no I ran out of the fresh stuff because it's so fast. It melts into almost anything. I don't even use it instead of rice necessarily. It's literally just like I want to add a vegetable to something really fast and it's going to take on the flavor of whatever else is there. And it does like add this nutritional boost. I'm assuming you would know better than me, but
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I think frozen cauliflower is amazing. We keep it in our freezer too. I actually just had some last night. We made
oh, nice.
Indian food and used it as like the rice. But I know you actually wrote a whole book about
Oh,
cauliflower,
yeah.
right?
Well, it's
So,
funny. So I wrote a book about cauliflower for short stack editions. It's like 20 recipes, but I also wrote a book with Lotus Foods. They're a rice company.
oh,
So
cool.
about rice. So I'm not like a cauliflower versus rice, I don't have a preference. I actually really love both ingredients. Um, but yeah, the frozen, especially the frozen cauliflower rice, like not the florets, but I just like the way it like really takes on any flavor. And it's like if you're just, stuck but need a vegetable,
Yeah.
it's there.
And what inspired you to do like I think you called it sub short stack book? What do you call it?
Yeah, so there was a little publishing company called Short Stack Editions that
Mm-hmm.
was around for a few years, and they did the single ingredient booklets. Um, and there was one on eggs and one on strawberries, one on tomatoes. They did 6 a year. It was kind of this cross between like a magazine or a periodical and a book. And so I did the one on cauliflower. It was one of the last ones actually before they stopped publishing. But I just roasted cauliflower is like my favorite thing. I
Mm-hmm.
could eat it many times a week and mix it up and not get sick of it. Um, so I was like, what else can I do with this? And obviously, there's so much you can do, and it was really fun. It was really fun.
Yeah. What are some of the unique uses? I know when I think of rice cauliflower, all I think of is cauliflower rice most of the time, or like
Yeah,
throw it in smoothies.
yeah.
But what are like some of the more unique uses that you came across for cauliflower?
One is so bechamel sauce it's like a creamy, um, it's usually a mix of flour, milk, butter, and becomes like a cream sauce basically.
Mm-hmm.
But it's milk and not cream. And with cauliflower, I'll have to look at the recipe, but it basically behaves like bechamel, and I think I
Oh,
was
wow.
able to make it without dairy. And then when you once you have your bechamel sauce, you can include that in so many different things. So I think I end up doing like a moussaka in the little booklet, but if you make a bechamel for a lasagna, or even something like I did a fondue, so you're still adding cheese, you get the dairy, but you don't have well, you wouldn't always make a bechamel for fondue. But anyway, I was able to make a fondue with less cheese, but it still like had a really nice flavor and texture. So that was kind of like one of my like favorite uses. Or I did a vegan for serious eats. I developed a vegan fettuccine Alfredo, and that uses the cauliflower bechamel. Um, I did develop a recipe for like the cauliflower crusted pizza, which I think it's really fun. It's not something I would choose to do often, although now that there's frozen cauliflower rice, makes it it does make it so much easier because I was like, pulsing it in the food processor to break it down and all that. But I mean, I did the things like, cauliflower buffalo wings where you toss it in the buffalo sauce.
Mm-hmm.
It's very delicious.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think it's such a versatile vegetable, and that's sometimes it's underappreciated because I think especially as children of the 80s and 90s, we often either saw it oversteamed or like raw in a veggie tray. And
Yeah,
so
raw, it's the worst.
I know. So it's nice to see, like, similar to Brussels sprouts, like this new way to enjoy these vegetables that maybe scarred us in our childhood. So
Yeah. Although it's funny, like thinking about cauliflower as a plant, um, I think in the book we talk about this, but it's like this one vegetable with all these leaves and all this stem. Um, so sometimes I'm like, oh man, it's a lot of plant matter that went into this one head of cauliflower. Um, and there actually in the book there's a recipe for using the cauliflower and Brussels sprouts leaves.
hmm
Um, but I do think about that sometimes. Like it's such a beautiful vegetable on its own, and cauliflower rice kind of removes that like beautiful form. So sometimes
yes.
I'm like, oh, it should stay like as it is with its cool, like beautiful structure. But other times I'm like, give me the cauliflower rice. It's making life easier. So
I know. We'll go out and do like field visits. And one of the things I love is like tasting different parts of the plant. And cauliflower is one of the things I didn't even realize how like sweet and like crunchy and delicious the leaves can be, especially like younger leaves with like a nice rib down the middle. Oh my gosh, they're so good. And I'm like, man, I've been missing out when you have just the plain old cauliflower, not having the leaves, and then finding uses for the stem too. Same with
totally.
broccoli, but there's so
Yeah.
much fiber there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
good. So, you've also written a book called Modern Potluck, and I
Mhm.
love the idea of a potluck. What inspired you to write this book, and can you tell me a little bit more about kind of the concept of the book?
Sure. I grew up with a lot of extended family nearby, and almost every gathering was a potluck. We didn't always use that word, but
Mm-hmm.
people brought dishes. And when I had my daughter, I was living in New York City away from extended family. And before I had my daughter, I was actually cooking like, multi-course dinner parties for my friends. And then I was like, I can't do that anymore. It's too exhausting. The shopping is, half a day. And but I was like, I still want to see my friends. So I kind of was like, oh, potluck to the rescue. So I then started to think about like potluck food, and um it's so delicious. Like I think like some of the classic potluck food is so delicious, but some of the I remember less with my family, but I would go to community potlucks, and there would be these like casseroles with like the cornflake topping and super cheesy potatoes, which I love. But I was like, some of it is a little different from the way like my friends and I eat, where we are incorporating a lot more vegetables and color and spices and herbs. And so I was like, maybe it's time for just a different look at potluck food and what that can be, really.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the idea came about. And I started playing around with like, what makes something a good potluck dish. It's, portable, can serve a crowd, can hang out for a while. Um, or if if it can't hang out for a while as is, it could hang out in like a crock pot, slow cooker type situation and keep it hot. Uh, so anyway, it was a really fun book. I still love the recipes in that book. I will say it's funny looking at it now. I love the recipes. I think sometimes when I see them, they have a little bit of a like, look what I can do, because it's there is a lot of like there are like more ingredients, and I feel like my cooking now, I'm like paring back. How can that's what I keep thinking about. How can I pare back? How can I streamline this even more? Um, but when I want a dish that, I feel like people are going to be like, wow, that's so good, then I break out Modern Potluck.
Yeah. What's caused you to want to streamline more?
I think just recognizing, you said with patients, their like lack of interest in cooking. There's interest and there's like willingness. And I have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of friends who they know how to cook. They're like moderately interested, but they really don't want to spend a lot of time. And even when they're cooking for a potluck or something, they don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time. And I just kept hearing that over and over again. So
Mm-hmm.
I started to think about like, how could I make this? It's really like, how can I make this easier for my friends? Like, how can I,
Yeah.
do what I do, but make it so uh, more people and like it's accessible to more people in my life. So that's what it is. And also my own. I mean, even stuff I cook at home sometimes is so dead simple. And I think I had this mentality of like, well, this is just stuff I threw together. This isn't a recipe. And now I'm trying to think like, is there something here that's worth sharing with people?
I think there's so much value to that. If you were going to a potluck this weekend, what would you make? Like what's your go-to?
Depends on the season, right?
Yeah, perfect answer.
Um, let's see. I feel like I need the book in front of me. Oh, I know.
You
So
can
there's
grab it too if you want.
actually I probably will make this for Christmas Eve. It's a root vegetable gratin. Um,
Mm,
it's actually a recipe that I adapted from a former coworker. It's so good. Her name's Melissa Rubel Jacobson, but it is in Modern Potluck, and it's a gratin, but usually you think of gratin, it's like potatoes and cream, and I do love that. But this is I think it's sweet potato, or maybe it's butternut squash and rutabaga and maybe celery root. I don't remember the exact blend, but it's those vegetables layered and baked together, but it's actually stock instead of cream until the
yeah.
very end, and then you just add a little bit of cream, which helps the top caramelize a little bit. And it's topped with some nuts. And I think that is what I would make for a winter type of potluck.
Yum. That sounds so good. And I know one of the things I read about your book is kind of talked about navigating dietary preferences too when you go to a potluck. What's your general advice on that? Because that can be pretty tricky. A note from our sponsor.
The Chef's Garden is a family-owned regenerative farm that grows the most flavorful and nutritious vegetables, herbs, and microgreens for culinary professionals and home cooks. For over 30 years, the Chef's Garden has supplied some of the world's finest chefs and restaurants. Now, through Farmer Jones Farm, the same delicious ingredients are available to home cooks in the United States to use and enjoy, delivered directly to their homes. The Chef's Garden mission is to grow exceptional vegetables, care for each other and the land, and inspire a vegetable-forward future. For more information, visit chefs-garden.com.
I like to ask people if they're coming over for dinner, whether it's potluck or not, if they have dietary restrictions. And then if I'm hosting like a bigger potluck, I will ask people to when I'll often have labels available so people can label their dish, and then it could say like, you could do it either way. You could say like gluten-free, or you could go the other way where it's like contains wheat. But I try to have some kind of little sign. But yeah, I think I did, like, in the book, I do address like if you're a guest versus if you're a host. And I think as a guest, if you have a dietary restriction, not to be afraid to just say it, because I know a lot of people, they're shy about it and they're like, oh, I'll figure something out. Um, but it can't hurt, because somebody like me, I don't mind like figuring out something else to make. So it can't hurt to tell the host.
I think that's great. And I avoid gluten. And so for me, sometimes you're in that awkward position of you like hate to ask, but you're like, can I eat this? And so having the labels and everything would be wonderful, and also just save a lot of stress for the people who have allergies or sensitivities. So
yeah. And in the book, all the recipes are tagged. So if something is gluten-free or vegan, it's all tagged. And then there are some cases where I share alternatives. Like, I know that there's an oven fried chicken recipe, and it was developed so it could be served cold. Like, I developed it, and then I would test it and then refrigerate it and taste it cold, because that was the point, but I tested it with wheat flour and rice flour, and in that context there really wasn't a difference. So in those cases, I try to offer those alternatives.
Yeah, that's so nice. When it comes to like the energy of sharing food, and just coming together around food, can you talk about kind of why that's important, and maybe a tip or two related to what to bring when you're looking for like a really great meal where you can connect with the people you're sharing it with?
I'm a total introvert. Love spending time by myself, recharge, and all of that. But I do think that the pandemic, especially like the early part where many of us were much more isolated, it did show us the benefits of social interaction,
Right.
And I think eating and coming together over food is such a huge part of that, and something that, like, maybe people like me who thought, we were fine being by ourselves so much, started to miss and realize the value of. And in terms of what to bring, I think that's just comes down to like, good communication. If you're going to somebody else's house, like, because I am the kind of person a lot of times where I do like to make all the food, unless it's like I'm clearly saying it's a potluck. So I'm always like, just bring yourself, like, don't worry about it, And so sometimes people will bring things that are meant to be consumed later, like almost like a host gift, like a little jam or this, or, a dessert. And I think that's great. But I think just like, don't, like, not being afraid to be communicative, because sometimes, like, there are times where I love the help. So, if somebody says, what can I bring? I'll be pretty specific. And like, bring 2 cheeses or something like that. So.
No, I think that's great. And it is, I think, especially after COVID, it has made everyone I think for the most part, miss that social interaction and being able to share food and just have a conversation with people face to face.
And one of my favorite things anymore with that is, again, it comes back to like streamlining. What can I like do less of? Like, I've been trying to, maybe not overthink something like a menu, and just like have a friend over, like literally make the same thing I'm going to make for dinner that I am making for like my husband and daughter, but then, making enough so like 1 or 2 other people can come. And that's probably a very normal concept to most people, but as somebody like thinks so much about food and gathering, for me, I don't know, it's almost been like a little bit of like a challenge to myself. Like,
I laugh because I so relate to that. Like, if people are coming over, it's a multi-day process between cleaning the house and shopping and cooking and all the things. Like, it's it can be pretty exhausting.
Yeah.
And I love that you're saying it really doesn't need to be like
Yeah.
just enjoy having people over versus
like
being
just this,
so worried.
with this season, it's like, you know, it's, I feel like especially with winter, I'm like, you know, hey, I'm making soup. Do you want to come over? You know, something easy like that,
Right.
be pretty low key.
Yeah. And sometimes that's the best meal there is, right? Like just to have something really simple like that and nourishing.
Totally.
So when it comes to vegetables and wine, I know you're the editor at Food and Wine for quite a while. So let's talk about vegetable and wine pairing. Something I know you know a lot about each. What are your basic tips when it comes to vegetables and wine?
I will say for the most part, your white wines and rosé will pair better with most vegetables, especially green vegetables. And like Gruner Veltliner is an Austrian grape, and it tends to be really good with like anything in the green vegetable category. Your sweeter vegetables like sweet potatoes, I think can be really nice with wines that are a little bit off dry, like a Riesling. That said, I will say I'm not a huge stickler about pairing. I tend to like just open wines I like and eat food I like. And if there's a magical pairing, that's great. And if there's not, that's also fine. So it's like, I guess if I really think about it, I could create these pairings, but most of the time, I tend to just like have a general, like, oh, I want like a richer white tonight or something. And that happens to work well with the food. Great.
I love that. I think that's a great philosophy. So our podcast is called Farming for Health. What does farming for health mean to you?
Well, I think because of working on the book with the Chef's Garden, I learned so much about how the soil is everything. And then even doing gardening and, when I nourish my soil well versus not and seeing the difference in those plants, I do see why it comes back and starts with the soil and, soil health. So I think to me, that's what it means. Like all starts with the soil and then, is it healthy soil, healthy plants,
healthy people.
Yeah. So,
yes.
Yeah, to me, that's definitely what it means.
I think that's perfect. And I know our listeners or audience are going to want to learn more about you. Where do they go online to find out more about you?
Sure. So my website is kristindonnelly.com. And I talking about streamlining recipes, I've been working on a newsletter. It's weekly called Mission Dinner. It's missiondinner.substack.com. So it's a recipe every week, and they have about 5 ingredients and take 30 minutes or less. So you can kind of like see my recipe process in action because a lot of it is like me, again, like how can I make this even simpler?
I love that. And what a great inspiration to even just try a new recipe every week. So.
Totally. Actually, it can't come going back to my friends. I asked them, what are your biggest challenges? And for them with dinner time, especially and if they have kids, they said it's getting out of the rut. They don't mind, like they'll cook most nights and they just cook the same stuff because it's like they don't have to think about it when they're shopping. Their kids like it. So the idea with Mission Dinner was like, maybe you don't need a complicated meal plan. You just, you make your same stuff and people will like it. But every once in a while, you can add a new recipe to your repertoire. So that's
That's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thank you, Amy. This was really fun.
Thank you for listening to Farming for Health. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. Connect with Farmer Lee Jones and I on Instagram and Facebook.